From his home in Walpole, New Hampshire, filmmaker and producer Ken Burns discusses making the Civil War. Here now is media critic and host Ron Powers.
The war is ennobled. The object is higher. Lincoln. You've just shown us the great political event of the Civil War, the Emancipation. Tell us about that.
These two episodes changed the direction forever of the American Civil War. We sometimes get confused and distracted by states' rights, free navigation of the Mississippi, Union. This war had a higher object, as everyone has pointed out, and I'm very pleased that this culminates in this incredibly, not only historic event, but emotional event, that the antietam, the bloodiest day in American history, gives way to perhaps the brightest day, as we say, and that is good news. Remember that the one thing that is surviving here is popular government. That's the big struggle here. We started our country saying all men are created equal, but we accepted a few people, and now a generation and a half later, we're fighting to remove that asterisk from the phrase all men are created equal. And we have good news tonight.
You bring us that good news in an interesting way, Ken, not only with spoken text and with information, but with an interweaving of music. Music is a very important part of your narrative scheme in this series, isn't it?
Traditionally, music in feature films or in documentaries is added on at the end, literally scored, and music is cut, recorded to the scenes that have already been edited. It is added on.
Imposed upon it.
Exactly. We feel that music is as important an element as the imagery, as the narrative, as all of these things. And so we do our music from the beginning, recording dozens of these Civil War tunes, not at the end, but the beginning of our process, and cutting some scenes to the music instead of the other way around. All the music is contemporary to the Civil War, with the exception of our theme song, which was written by a friend of ours, a musician who plays, a fiddle player named Jay Unger, who wrote this beautiful piece, Ashokan Farewell,
yes,
which begins every episode. But besides that tune, everything else is from the period which we have arranged, rearranged, using in most cases authentic instrumentation to get the feel. That kind of accuracy has to go not just to the events that we portray, but in how we collect our material. And the music, I think, becomes an important element, if only because of the faith that we've placed in its ability to communicate complex things.
But music is just one element, one aspect of the sound that you employ consistently. We hear things in this series under the spoken voices. We hear the snapping of flags. We hear cicadas in the grass. We hear indigenous birds that would have been typical of the battlefield.
The reality of our conversation right now, Ron, is one of not only our voices and our thoughts, but of a plane overhead, of a breeze rustling leaves, of the distant sound of cars passing by. All of these things help to build the oral reality that we have here in this moment. In order to help make the Civil War come alive for us, we insisted that we construct the same reality. So we would take each battle and layer it first with the appropriate birds and cicadas, to add the shouts of men and the sounds of whinnies of horses, and then the muskets, and then the rifles, and then what it sounded like when a whole battery of cannon went off, and the screams, and indeed the sounds of dying, wounded, maimed men, and all of this layer upon layer to give the sense that this photograph was once alive.
You took your cameras to some of these battlefields on the same calendar day that the battle was fought.
The same interest that we had in music, that it be authentic, that it be played with the same instruments, we extended to the live cinematography, which is a kind of relief valve on these old photographs, an attempt to sort of poetically contain the war. I can remember being at Gettysburg on July 3rd, the same time as Pickett's charge happened. And
what was it like?
It's probably one of the most powerful experiences of doing this film, to be aware of the men who gave their lives that day. There is the field shimmering in the excruciating heat that was there, the same as in 1863. It made the past palpable. And I believe in collecting those things. They can only accrue and improve what we're doing. There's an old-fashioned word that the 19th century used a lot. We don't use it too much now. Honor, or being honorable. Not just in the superficial use of that word, but in a deeply held feeling. I believe to approach the music as we have, to approach this live cinematography as we have, to film the old photographs in the energetic way that we have, trusting them is honorable to the past. And that is what we attempt. We don't always succeed, but that's the intention.
When I see footage in this series that was captured by you and your cameramen, I see images of water and the moon.
Yes. Hitchcock had what he called the MacGuffin, this object that seems to, the narrative seems to surround it. Each one of my films, I've tried to find something that I'm drawn to, that is a kind of visual equivalent, an unspoken visual equivalent. In my film about the Shakers, it was clouds. In the Civil War, it's moon and it's water. It's what I'm drawn to when we film the scene as a way to poetically evoke what's going on.
And it's what those men would have seen that is unchanging.
Yes, exactly. We have a secret. We film our old photographs as if they're live, and we film our live cinematography as if they're two-dimensional, painterly sort of images.
Why?
We take the modern, now quiet battlefields, and by filming them with this very formalistic way, we freeze them. We make them for all time. We wish our live cinematography to be timeless. On the other hand, we wish to take these old photographs and have you believe that they're alive. How do you do that? By treating them as if they're a long shot, a medium shot, a close-up, or something in which can be dissected to make a movie scene. And that I'm merely a director with a megaphone standing off this old photograph saying, cue the horses. Okay, you can get up now.
Right. A couple of the personalities who do begin to come to life in these two episodes. Stonewall Jackson, the pious, blue-eyed killer of the South, and this curious, hesitant, paranoid, handsome Union General George McClellan. Tell me about the function of these characters as they begin to shape the destiny of the war.
The Southern success in 1862 is contained in one word, Stonewall.
Force of will.
Exactly. Religious, fanatical, driven, brilliant, succeeding this year. The northern side is characterized by a kind of tentative ineptness. Nothing speaks to that more than George McClellan. I've said that there's really only one villain in this history of the Civil War, and that was the institution of slavery, and perhaps George McClellan. This is the man who has the classic case of the slows. We have to make him the villain in order to enjoy the satisfaction of issuing the Emancipation Proclamation and firing George McClellan. It makes for good history. But after burying McClellan, I think it's really important also to resurrect him a little bit. This is a man who said, and I agree with him, that the sight of the sick and mangled corpses on the battlefield held nothing for him. This is a great pacifist speaking, or a part of him is a pacifist. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a war that had to be fought, a war that had to be prosecuted to end the terrible stain of slavery, and people like George McClellan, as exemplary as they were in preparing the Army of the Potomac and the fighting that it is going to do in the next several episodes, and its great organization is due in no small part to McClellan's genius as an organizer. Because he wouldn't commit him, we have no business with him, and we need to get rid of him. One sidebar, George McClellan does come back in the most ornery of circumstances to haunt Abraham Lincoln again.
This was a very photographed war. We certainly realize now that Matthew Brady wasn't the only photographer working.
Matthew Brady was nearly half blind, could barely take a photograph, and in fact is in many of the photographs he took. Largely what we consider a Brady photograph is the work of his assistants, Sullivan and others, and many other itinerant photographers who went around the scene. The great tragedy, of course, is that so many of the southern images have been lost, and we don't know a good deal of the great photographic record of the Civil War.
They weren't recorded on film, many of them, were they?
No, a lot of them are glass plate negatives that get mislaid and broken, and when you're in a war, not the thing that you save when your life and your family's life is in trouble. Towards the end of the film, Mary Chestnut says, even our archives are gone. That was a sense of great loss to her. I was always struck by that. Even our archives are gone. As if even the record of the society that was now passing would not be preserved. A great tragedy in many, many ways. But photography came of age during this war. We had a particular difficulty in dealing with it because, of course, we were trying to use this very medium to tell a story and make you believe it was real. So calling attention to photography was contrary to our purposes. So what we did was
postmodernist.
Exactly. Too many arrows pointing in two different directions. But what we did is we started our third episode, the second half of 1862, with a section on photography and the poof of the photographic studio as the men got their portraits, and that magnificent shot of Custer with his good friend J.B. Washington, now a federal prisoner. That, again, is the whole war in a nutshell. That in order to become one people, we had to tear ourselves in two. And you can see this in the bipolar photographs of the southerner and a northerner together.
We enter the phase of this war that's familiar to anyone who has the least amount of interest or scholarship in the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg.
This is the turning point of the war. We will see the continuation of Southern triumphs, and then everything will come to a head in a little crossroad town in Pennsylvania. And the war will be decided for all intents and purposes there, but the war will not be over there. And the sacrifice that people make north and south will prompt the most extraordinary individual to try to contain the suffering of his people in the most extraordinary words that I know.